Welcome, I'm Mary Claire, and welcome back to Peak, the official Growth Sport podcast. Today, we're going to continue our series on Dr. Brian Ritchie's new book, The Culture Code, and keep the train running. And we're going to talk about chapter 2, Peak Performance Culture. We're going to touch on what it really is, how it works, and why it's not just a nice to have. Brian, welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah. These are fun. Okay, we're going to touch on a few topics today, but I really want to kick us off by talking about what really is peak performance culture. It's something we talk about a lot. Let's help our listeners understand what it actually is.
Yeah. So peak performance culture, in really simple terms, is a culture that reinforces the right behaviors that lead to the outcomes that we desire. So let's just unpack that just a little bit. What we're saying is that I want a culture, an environment, and remember, culture is the rules of the game. It's how we interact. It's what we do. I want that culture to reinforce the behaviors that lead to the best outcomes, that help me become the best player on the team I can possibly be, the best contributor, the best performer, the best thinker, best innovator, all of those things. I want all of the rules of the road and the rules of the game to push me in that direction. So it's just that simple. So I just naturally want to be pushed to do the right things at the right time.
Yeah. Okay. And that's a great connection between what we talked about last time, what is culture, and then again, like we just talked about, what is peak performance culture. Okay. So we've both been leading organizations over time. I'm a leader listening to our conversation. How do I know if I have peak performance culture or I just have a functional one? You may have just named it, but I'm going to.
No, there is a great test here that I love, which is, are you anxious that if you leave the building, your people will not do what they should do? If that's true, you have a bad performance culture. And how many times has that been true for us as a leader? Which is like, man, if I'm around, they're doing the right things. But if I walk out the door, all of a sudden things go south. What that says is you don't have a positive peak performance reinforcing culture. What you've got is a culture based on fear or based on, not really understanding or covering things up or politics, or you've got some other culture going on. You don't have a peak performance culture. If you leave the building and your confidence is super high that everyone's going to do the right things for the right reasons at the right time, you've got a peak performance culture.
I was just actually with a leader this week, a CEO, talking about another leader in their organization and really trying to understand how do we drive performance. And the root cause of actually what we got to was a lack of understanding, of actually not knowing how or what to do. And then that was causing the CEO to reach down in and rather than enable.
I love that differentiation, by the way. We should unpack that because that's super important. If you find yourself not confident that people know what to do and you're reaching down in and micromanaging rather than enabling, you are the source of the toxic culture. Because what you're doing is you're taking away from that person their ability to be the CEO of their space. And once they're not the CEO of their space, they're trying to figure out what you want done, when you want done, how you want done. It's really you. You're the job. You're the person. They're working you. They're not working the company.
And I actually think that's a nice transition into the next topic of this concept of urgent versus important. And often in those situations when we're fishing around to figure out how can I be helpful or not knowing what to do, we just tackle a bunch of things that seem critical or seem urgent, but aren't actually moving the ball forward. So this is something we talk about a lot with our clients, and there's always head nodding. We've got a group of 30 people in a room, and it makes sense. And I think our culture today, environmentally, leads to this just tackling what's right in front of me rather than taking a step back. So before we get too deep here, talk about there's a nice matrix I think you use too, but in the book, let's talk about why it's so easy and why organizations often tackle the urgent versus what's actually important. Why is that a culture trap?
Yeah, it is a big culture trap, and this is really important. If you think about a 2x2 matrix, right, and you've got important on one axis and urgent on the other axis, then you can put everything you do into one of those four boxes. So either something is urgent and important, which those are super simple, right? I mean, if you don't do that, everybody knows you didn't do that. That's, hair on fire, except for me. I don't have any hair, but for most people, it's a difficult situation. You got to do those. You do them quickly. As soon as those are done, however, it becomes really hard because now you're like, all right, what do I do next?
Yep.
Well, you have a bunch of things that are urgent, but not important, but they feel important because they're urgent. And we've learned to attach urgence and importance together when they're
Yep.
not always the same. Think about when your phone rings. That's an urgent, but not necessarily important thing, but we treat it as if it's important.
Yep.
So then we immediately go to those kinds of things. And by the way, those are also easy because we can be reactive. They're in our face. The boss is seeing them, we're seeing them. And we tend to do the analysis on how important they are ex post, in other words, afterwards,
Yep.
rather than ex ante or before. So we end up doing those. Now, once we've done those, what do we do? Well, typically what we'll end up doing is the things that are not important and not urgent, because we're like, wow, you know what? I am frankly just tired right now and I got to take a break. So let's play a little solitaire, or let's go to the water fountain, or let's go to lunch, something, right? I'm tired. The thing we do last is the non-urgent but important. And the reason is, that's right, that upper right-hand quadrant. And the reason we do that last is that those are hard things. They're not immediately gratifying. We don't get dopamine hits immediately. They take time. They take a lot of effort, and they're easily procrastinated, right? So we just keep putting them off until they become urgent and important.
Yep.
And then we tend to do them at that point.
I found myself in that, just personally in business creation, in that trap this week of, actually the last 2 weeks, of trying to get a new product out the door that I can't. I keep tackling work with individuals rather than taking a step back. And anyway, nevertheless, I'm battling it right now. So
yeah. And this leads, as you talked about, into very interesting cultural outcomes, because if we don't do the non-urgent but important things, we tend not to get change leadership. And we tend to focus in a reactive way on everything that's coming at us, but not in a transformative way on the innovation that's required to stay at the top of our game. And so what happens is we lose ground over time. And culturally, we create an environment where people aren't evaluated on the things that really matter. They're evaluated on how quickly they can respond to urgent things, whether they're important or not, which again creates this counterintuitive, toxic cultural environment of non-performance.
And we think how often we're hearing about, we want to calm the whirlwind. I can't tell you how many times we've heard this. And this focus on the non-urgent but important on a continual basis, the process by which you keep forcing yourself to come back to that, usually calms the whirlwind. And we'll get to that. But that whirlwind of that culture is exactly what you're talking about, which can happen.
That's exactly right.
So, okay. So let's jump to, you kind of end the chapter with the 5 characteristics of a peak performance culture. And here we'll eventually meld into or transition into the sport framework, but we're building to get there. So let's talk about those 5 core characteristics. It's how does strategic alignment lead to transparency, personal performance lead to continuous improvement, operational execution lead to process leadership, and results accountability lead to measurement, team strength lead to trust. Those elements of transparency, continuous improvement, process leadership, measurement, and trust are these 5 characteristics. So talk to us a little bit about, help us understand kind of what this is about and how we can start thinking about it.
So I love that. And we will unpack these in great detail as we go forward to know how to do them. But think of it this way. We've identified 5 characteristics of a performance culture. And you can ask yourself, do we have a transparent culture? Do we have continuous improvement as a culture, process leadership, all of these different things? You can say, how well are we doing? And so that's the first measurement process. Then if you say, well, we're pretty good at transparency, but not so good at continuous improvement, good at process leadership, not so good at measurements, and we're so on trust, say, as an example.
Yeah.
Then we got to say, well, how do we get these things? And what we're arguing is that there are specific steps to take very easy and transparent. I don't want to use that word twice, but knowable steps that lead to transparency.
Yep.
And we think that's strategic alignment. When you get an organization strategically aligned from the top to the bottom, all the goals ladder up, all the KPIs are aligned, your everything moves toward that focused top point, you get transparency. When you work on personal performance individually and very purposefully, you get continuous improvement. When you get your operational execution and your SOPs in a way that everybody understands what the most important things are to be working on, you get process leadership because you get that in conjunction. Now, these overlap, right? Process leadership also leads to transparency. And then if you get great accountability on a weekly basis, then you get really strong measurement. And if you can get team strength and best practice sharing, you get trust and vulnerability within your team. So those match up. And then we're going to show you how to do each one of those 5 steps in order to get those characteristics in your culture.
And those ladder up to the ultimate, when we talked about culture of alignment, engagement, and accountability. We started, we started high, and we're going to come narrow and narrow, but we'll see how that impacts as we dig into the model, how that actually drives alignment, engagement, and accountability.
That's exactly correct.
Yep. Well, great. Well, Brian, great spending time with you. Thanks for hanging out with us again.
Super fun.
Thanks to all you listeners. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and follow us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, we hope your drive toward peak performance is successful. See you soon.